Alright, another response video to Franklin Who. Didn't have the usual beginning, but anyway, it happens. Talking about waves and the fact that water waves appear to get bigger, okay, as they go further out. The wavelength changes, okay, the wavelength gets bigger as the water wave migrates. I suppose I should turn this other camera on, because, yeah. Get rid of that. Okay. So, I won't draw it any further than this idea. Okay, there, that's close enough. It's like a bullseye, The distance here, the wavelength, the frequency gets longer as the wave goes further out. And he's analogizing that to cosmic redshift. Alright, now my explanation for cosmic redshift is simply based on like Compton scattering. That there's little atoms of hydrogen in the universe, and every time a photon hits one of those atoms, it has a commensurate decline in its wavelength, a tiny effect, that the frequency of the light going in will be expanded on going out. Now I'm exaggerating it a lot. It's a tiny effect, but it happens. So every time photons are scattered or transmitted through atoms, this effect takes place, and that's the explanation. The further away the object is, the more likely the light has had to encounter scatter from little bits of dust and atoms in the universe, and they have caused the expansion of the wavelength. So, and this is an important subject because frankly they're using these effects as excuses to say space is being generated in the universe. I mean, it's really a lot of crazy theories are based on their choice of a explanation that frankly isn't very mechanical and doesn't have much to do with reality. Alright, so in the first sentence or two, Franklin's going to mention the thing generating the number of waves there are. So when you throw a rock into the water, okay, what it's doing is it's creating pressure in these directions, you could argue, and what's happening is that pressure, because water is not compressible, okay, it builds up, and then the only place the water has to go is the easy place, which is up. So it goes up because that's where it's not creating more pressure, that's where there's a low pressure, so it goes up. And the force of gravity is going to push it back down again. And when it pushes it back down, what's it going into? Well, it's going into some pressure out, okay, away from the center. But, so it's going to move in this direction more likely. But the fact is that this part here is calm, okay? Now that you've created the pressure, this part has a low pressure, so it can go back here, and it does. So it recycles here numerous times, and that's what creates the repeating of the wave, is that once you have the impact, the pressure goes back to neutral, and then the pressure goes back in, creates the same wave in the center again, same lump. That lump gets pushed down by gravity, and it goes both directions. So it is the same thing. Each wave is doing the same thing. It's just when you go to the center, there's no place, the center is where both the pressure from the wave you created on this side, and the wave you created on this side, and the wave you created, the pressure from all of those are intersecting. And so this one has more energy, so it keeps repeating the cycle and just keeps pushing out, alright, from gravity, giving back the energy, and it just keeps recycling until it runs out of energy. And this is, and it's also creating these waves going out. But that tells you how many you're going to get, is basically how long can this cycle continue before it finally dispenses all the energy going out. Alright, so just throw that in as a bit context, whatever. Alright, I think draft physics explanation of why the wavelength expands may be plausible. So the deeper explanation, the one I would say I would bet money on, is the fact that it's all being created by rays of light hitting objects. The objects move slower than the speed of light when they hit them. That slowness means the force has essentially been slowed down, and it's going to be recreated by the movement of the actual object. In the sense, you're changing its reflection. So if something hits me from behind, I move forward. I now reflect the universe. More stuff reflects off me because I'm moving into the stuff that's going to reflect off of me. So the stuff that hit me isn't going through me technically. I'm just creating a mechanism to cause a new reflection ahead of me. But that reflection is going to be a little bit slower than the reflection that hit me. So the wavelength is going to be a little bit less because we've used up a little time moving me very slowly, even though the forces that are reflecting off of me are moving the speed of light. All right, I suppose you could think of it, so he's really talking about the explanation of the expansion of the water. So he's really still talking about why the water expands. And the other thing I wanted to get to, the part that I find intriguing is the fact that this comparison to water waves provides a good reason to understand that photons are fundamentally different and that they are rays and they aren't in a medium because of the primary problem with mediums. Okay, let's get to that. I probably have enough room over here, maybe. Shit, or down here. The problem with mediums is that if you have this idea of a wave moving in this direction, the problem is it's doing this thing and this thing. It's pushing into the environment these ways. So a laser beam, for example, you'd have to argue that the wave is going this way, but somehow it's creating energy or movement in these directions. It's changing the ether. Okay, if you have an ether, it's moving the ether this way and this way. It's changing it. And so that's, in my opinion, like there's absolutely no evidence that a beam, a ray of light going across in front of me has any effect on me, that it can produce any kind of effect, that there's any way to see it other than it terminating inside of a pupil. That I can't see light, I can't feel light, it can't be detected. It's undetectable moving this way. Okay, it's only detectable if it hits you. You can't detect it any other way because it's not radiating anything. It hasn't changed the universe at all by moving through it in all these other directions. So the ray is all there is. There's just the rock you're throwing. There's no effect on the rest of the universe in all these places based on this rock's movement. Nothing's reflecting off the rock. The rock is a force. The forces don't interact. There's no medium that can make them interact. One photon can't see the other photons, kind of thing. They're not moving a medium. All right. Short way of saying it. All right, I suppose you could think of it as an individual crest being flattened by the force of gravity. So the expansion is just the fact that as you're pushing down with gravity, you're flattening. But the only way you can flatten really is you have to be moving in both directions. The pressure is being applied in both directions, and that's causing it to expand. If it was only moving in one direction, then there wouldn't be any reason for it to expand. But I'm not sure about the waves going both ways, since a calm area forms at the center and the waves only seem to go outward. So again, the calm area it's an illusion because it's not calm. The center is constantly oscillating. As long as you're creating waves, the center is oscillating. Okay, I mean, you can sort of see that with slow motion film of water droplets and such, that they, it keeps the fountain in the center keeps rising. Although my main point is that you don't have to understand how a phenomenon works in order to observe it working. So again, this is partly an argument about what physics is or science, and frankly, observation is interesting, but frankly, explanations are better. Okay, and accurate explanations. Ones that don't have holes in them or don't have problems, that aren't completely just analogistic. So you really want your explanation to be complete. Now, lots of things we can't explain with analogies because nothing else is like it. Like I could say consciousness. There's no analogy to consciousness because it only happens when you have a brain and this manifestation. So you can argue that these elemental functions are unique in the sense that only one thing does exactly that. All right, and you can make comparisons to how the Earth and, I mean, you can make comparisons between galaxies and solar systems and atoms, but you have to be careful because the mechanisms that are actually making them look similar aren't the same mechanism. So it's sort of dangerous to just say, well, what do we observe? Because what that really doesn't explain anything. It doesn't say much. And this is where you get into sort of push-pull kind of arguments. I could argue that every pull that somebody could identify, that through investigation I could find the push. I could explain it as a push. That there is no such thing as a pull. So saying the word pull doesn't really mean anything because it's not a real concept. So you can observe a pull, you can observe attraction, and have a wrong conception of what's actually happening. All right. Or just because you can't explain something doesn't mean it doesn't happen. So I don't know. I think you need to be able to explain it, and that's the whole pursuit, is to find the truth, is to find the best explanation, to do the detective work and eliminate all the other suspects and figure out who is most likely guilty. Now, can we do that perfectly? No. But we know the rules where you can't contradict and you can't do certain things if you're going to do logic. If you're going to put the facts together and draw a conclusion, the facts sort of have to be pointing to your conclusion. It's like a connect the dots. You can't put in fake dots and you can't pretend certain dots don't exist. You have to play with the dots on the page and do your best to deduce the right image out of those dots. All right, mainstream would dismiss. Well, see, yeah, so mainstream is just fanatics. They chose Mohammed over Jesus kind of thing. They made some sort of choice about some fundamental thing, and now they're going to force everything to fit that elemental axiom that they've created. So they have axioms of magical forces existing. You magically attract, you magically repel. There's no mechanism for it. It's just a magical geodesic thingy. A bent something, dark matter. I mean, it's just, So mainstream has no credibility, and unfortunately, it's mainstream. That means it's popular, but it's really dumb and illogical. But somehow we're forced to engage it because that's where all the money is. I mean, that's where all the minds are, is stuck in that mire of goop. I mean, you really can't understand evolution if you believe in a God kind of thing. The two theories are not compatible. A God who subject us to the cruelties of evolution would be, an insidious monster. Yes, 10 of your children should die, so the one that lives is stronger. I mean, why would we agree to that? All right, anyway. Mainstream would dismiss tired light theories without some solid explanation of how this happens. So again, they dismiss every theory without even investigating or thinking about it a little bit. So they'll dismiss all particle theories of gravity because they'll say the word drag, but they won't give that any thought and say, well, the truth is that electrons and protons are dragged to a halt. Electrons and protons don't travel perpetually in a vacuum. So if I could make a perfect vacuum, I can't make an electron travel in it forever in a direction. I can't make a true electron gun. It fails. The electrons run out of energy. That's just a fact. This is just a real-life example of how wavelengths can get longer as they travel distance. So yeah, the fact that, again, making these comparisons, though, I think is very dangerous. So this is what ruins the whole two-slit thing. Analogizing a tiny similarity, and it's a tiny one, right? I mean, waves are oscillating up and down and, creating their interference pattern by creating differences in the oscillation, where light is a difference in whether there is light or there isn't light. It isn't about the light turning on, turning off, turning on, turning off. So, I mean, they're completely different functional things, and I would argue this is it kind of ruins the physics when people start comparing platypuses to ducks. It's just a mistake. And trying to force them to be the same lineage or the same heritage or the same branch and the same tree. They're not. They're just something doing a similar thing, but they have absolutely nothing to do with each other. The mechanism is completely different for a different purpose. The fact that they look like each other, the fact that the platypus almost quacks like a duck, it's not even close to a duck. It's for a completely different reason. Mainstream, okay, this is just a real life example of how wavelengths can get longer. Get longer as they travel distance and may serve as an analogy for galactic redshift. So I'm just saying any analogies we use, we should hope that they're close in substantial ways, okay, not just in appearance, but in function. So if I analogize electrons to the negative pole of a magnet, I think I'm a lot closer to the truth than if I analogize them to ping pong balls or something, So I mean, there's better and lesser quality analogies. And again, you're only using analogies because you haven't quite got enough modeling perfection to actually just say this is what it is, instead of describing it by being similar to something else. All right, this is a transverse wave, which I don't believe light is. So again, that's sort of why I find your video kind of a little bit irritating in a sense, because I know you don't believe in transverse waves. So why are you using water as an analogy when the mechanism is quite different, and it's not likely to be a very good analogy. And to me, it just falls into the same pattern of making this false comparison between light and electromagnetic radiation, which I argue is there's so many good arguments that it's rays of force, not anything called a wave. And it may not have anything to do with the actual nature of light. Yeah, so that makes it sort of, it's just another form of the deception, is to get lost in fake analogies, or analogies that really aren't complete or solid or useful beyond being aesthetically similar. They're not substantially similar. And I guess that's what I would argue for, is the analogy should have substantial similarity, not superficial similarity. Whether it's a ray or a wave or whatever, well, I think that's the underlying physics, is it's one or the other. And I'd say there's lots of reasons to say that for photons it's clearly not a wave. I'm just glad you can clearly see the wavelength becoming larger, as some commenters here, some have commented here that they can't or simply won't see it. Yes, so he's, unfortunately, John Walker posted a useless pile of crap comment. So it's some of my trolls are ending up on your video, which is unfortunate, but it's life. Because I've referenced you, they now are paying attention, and it's kind of negative attention, unfortunately. All right, so yes, I do see that they get longer, and I think anybody reasonable sees that the size of the wavelength on the inside of the circle is smaller than the size of the wavelength on the outside of the circle. Okay, won't see it. And your video provides an excellent example of what that looks like on the whiteboard. Well, I don't know if I did that or not, but thanks anyway for the credit. Thanks for the response and insights. Okay, so good. I mean, it'd be better if you made a video. I'm trying to provoke conversation on all these subjects, and you got to get people to provoke more conversation, and comments just sort of finish a subject rather than continue a subject. So I'll continue to make videos, and hopefully you'll continue to watch them when they're relevant, of interest to you and such. So anyway, I'd say that the elemental question of what causes cosmic redshift is open to, I think the tired light theories are a lot more sensible than any of the other theories, because all the other theories have nothing mechanical causing the effect. It's just something magical. So space creation, it's just a magical mechanism, and they take no responsibility for the implications of it, which would be you're making the space in between atoms bigger too, and so then the electrons should be getting weaker, and the protons and all the forces in the universe should get weaker and weaker because you're, expanding the distance between everything, and the whole thing doesn't make much sense. Doesn't make any sense, frankly. It's such a God of the gaps kind of, Hail Mary kind of theoretical pile of made up crap. I mean, is this to say, oh yeah, there's more space being made in the universe, and that's causing the wavelength to increase? So I mean, it shoots out at one size because the universe is a certain size when the light leaves. And somehow, because the universe is expanding, right, the distance between the elements of the photon, the wavelength, is expanding. I mean, it's a terrible explanation. All right, but these are really important pieces of elemental physics, and the fact that they still haven't been resolved is almost, to me, as bothersome as the fact that we finally, we can't kill religion, and can't get free of a lot of bad explanations, and we really should be past arguing bad explanations and should start arguing ones that have some sort of physical, mechanical legs that you can find. There's a real mechanism, not just it just happens. I mean, it just happens is not a very good explanation. Alright, anyway, so enough of videos. So, till the next time, appreciate the interaction, and still like to get your opinion on kinetic energy, mv squared versus mv. And, is there any logic to accepting the notion that there's any good reason to think squaring the velocity makes sense? That there's any place where it works? Okay. So, till the next, where it works better than just understanding energy as momentum. Is there any circumstance better diagrammed as kinetic energy or better diagrammed as momentum? I'd say momentum always provides a rational explanation, and kinetic energy only occasionally does when the two interacting objects have exactly the same velocity. So anyway, till the next time and such. Oh, at least I can do the ending. So anyway, this has been a draftphysics.com, debatephysics.com also. So I will create another debate section on the debate page for this debate with Franklin. So I have the previous conversation about the nature of induction and whether you can do experiments to prove wave versus particle theories based on transmitting electricity inductively. And so the difference between the electricity you transmit as just electricity and the electricity you transmit at a specific frequency, where you're able to tune into a frequency and detect very tiny amounts of energy, where when you're just broadcasting a pile of energy, you're just creating electricity in general, an increase in the total voltage of an antenna versus a tiny increase in the specific frequency in an antenna. Anyway, sort of interesting subject that I think we didn't fully complete, but whatever. Till the next time and such, and so forth and whatnot.